Let's talk about Nakia of the Old Ways and how we made this deck for only $30. Starting with our commander, we have Nikya of the Old Ways for 3 red and a green. It's a 5/5 centaur druid. You can't cast non-creature spells. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type that land produced. So while we have our commander out, non-creature spells are not going to happen. But the great part is, whenever we tap a land for mana, we're getting twice as much as we normally would. So we can really take advantage of huge spells in this deck. So let's talk about the ramp in the deck. We have Arbor Elf, Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves, and these all will get us a green mana. With Arbor Elf, we get to untap a Forest, which can potentially get us 2 green mana from our commander. We can also get lands from our library to the battlefield with cards like Dawntreader Elk, Sakura Tribe Elder, and Farhaven Elf. We get a basic land from our library to the battlefield tap, and this can be a forest or a mountain. We can also play additional lands with cards like Mina and Den Wildborn. This lets us play an additional land on each of our turns, which can end up being worth 4 mana with our commander on the battlefield. We can also pay a red and a green to return a land to our hand, making a creature gain trample until end of turn. So enough about ramp, let's talk about the removal in the deck. We have Manglehorn, which when it enters the battlefield we can destroy a target artifact, which does seem a little specific, but what's great is that artifacts our opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, so this means their treasure tokens they can no longer crack because they have to be tapped and sacrificed, so this is going to be one more step for them, or one more turn before they can get mana from that. We also have Reclamation Sage, which is a classic removal on a creature. When it enters the battlefield, we can destroy an artifact or enchantment, and it's also a creature, so this can end up being a way that we block or attack with. There's also Acidic Slime. When it enters the battlefield, we can destroy a target artifact, enchantment, or land. It's also a 2/2 with Death Touch, which is a great blocker for us. We have Gruul Rage Beast and Thorn Mammoth. These are creatures that are going to let us fight other creatures whenever a creature we control enters the battlefield, so we can slowly take out our opponent's threats. Let's talk about my favorite part of any deck tech, and that is the card draw. We have Abzan Beastmaster and Drum Hunter, so at our upkeep, if we control a creature with the greatest toughness or tied for the greatest toughness, we get to draw a card, and with Drum Hunter, if we control a creature with power 5 or greater, we may draw a card, and luckily our commander is a power 5 creature. There's also Beast Whisperer. Whenever we cast a creature spell, we get to draw a card, and since this deck is mostly creatures, specifically 62, it's very likely we'll draw a huge amount of cards. Same with Primordial Sage. Whenever we cast a creature spell, we're drawing a card. Soul of the Harvest. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, we're drawing a card. Keeper of Fables wants us to attack as many opponents as possible, and whenever we deal them combat damage, we get to draw a card. There's Dawnglade Regent. So this is an 8/8, which is really sweet by itself, but when it enters the battlefield, we become the Monarch. As long as we're the Monarch, our permanents are going to have hexproof, so this is going to protect us a little bit more. And then there's also Skyline Despot. Whenever this enters the battlefield, we become the Monarch, and if we're the Monarch at our upkeep, we create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying, which is really sweet. So I have a category called Mana Sinks, which goes from anywhere from creatures having abilities where we can put mana into them to creatures that are just 6 or more mana. So let's talk about that. We have Jade Mage and Ant Queen. I don't care what size their power and toughness is, but they have activated abilities where we can pay 2 to 3 mana and get tokens onto the battlefield. Since we make so much mana and we're going to have a huge amount of lands, it's very likely that we may end up just having leftover mana and we can just put it into these. We can cascade with cards like Annoyed Altasaur and Maelstrom Colossus, so this means we get multiple spells for free on top of the huge amount of mana we're already making. We do have some Eldrazi in here. We have Breaker of Armies, Eldrazi Devastator, Ulamog's Crusher, and Artisan of Kozilek. These are all 8 and 9 mana, but that only means 4 or 5 lands tapped whenever we have our commander on the battlefield, and it's going to be very easy for us to overwhelm our opponents with cards like these. If our creatures happen to die, that is completely fine. We have cards like Moldgraph Monstrosity. When this dies, we can exile it, and then we can return 2 creatures from our graveyard at random to our battlefield. There's also Stalking Vengeance. Whenever another creature we control dies, it's going to deal damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker, and since we have huge creatures, they're going to be dealing a lot of damage. Let's talk about Caller of the Pack. This is an 8/6 trample with Myriad, so whenever this attacks an opponent, we create a copy for each other opponent, so that's 24 power total attacking all of our opponents, 8 per opponent, and it's only 7 mana, so 4 lands to tap for this. Next I want to talk talk about Giant Ankeg. So this is an 8/8 insect with trample, ward 2, and it also says other creatures you control have trample and ward 2. This cost 8 mana, and this is a really sweet creature that just got printed, and I've never seen it before. I think this is a very powerful creature, and I really recommend you do not underestimate ward, especially because you have to pay an additional 2 mana to target my stuff now. And we can end the game with a few cards. Let's talk about Endrace Forerunners and Thunderfoot Baloth. So this is going to give our creatures trample and +2/+2. So on top of them being huge creatures already, giving them trample is very powerful. And then the last card I want to talk about is Primal Surge. This is 10 mana and it is a non-creature spell, but assuming our commander is removed for whatever reason, we're going to exile the top card of our library. If it's a permanent card, you may put it onto the battlefield. If you do, repeat this process. Primal Surge is the only card that's not a permanent in this deck. So we will literally put our whole library onto the battlefield. So this is a really awesome way to get all of our cards on the battlefield, and we will win by the next turn if we don't have haste for our creatures. If you love this video, you're going to love this one right here. I talk about Octavia Living Thesis. This deck is only $20. It's mono blue, and it wants you to put your instants and sorceries into the graveyard. If you want to find out more, click the video. Thank you to the patrons who help support this show, and if you want to buy this deck, there'll be a link in the description down below. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.